The ballroom at the Grand Palladium Hotel sparkled like something out of a fairy tale for my parents' 20th wedding anniversary celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, while arrangements of white orchids and roses created an atmosphere of elegant sophistication. The photographer Mom had flown in from New York was already setting up equipment for what she described as the most important family portraits of our lives. 120 of the city's most fashionable people mingled throughout the space, their designer gowns and tailored suits creating a sea of carefully curated elegance. This was Mom's dream event. The chance to showcase 20 years of social climbing, 20 years of building the perfect image, 20 years of establishing herself as one of the most influential women in our affluent community. And there I was, standing near the champagne fountain in my simple black dress from a mid-range department store, feeling like I'd crashed someone else's party. Isabella. Mom's voice cut through the ambient chatter with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention at social gatherings. Veronica Sterling approached me with her signature smile, the one that graced charity gala programs and society magazine features, radiant and polished and somehow sharp around the edges. At 52, Mom was still stunning in the way that only came from unlimited resources and professional maintenance. Her silver gown probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her jewelry collection could fund a small country's infrastructure, and her hair and makeup had been handled by the same team that prepared celebrities for red carpet events. "There you are, darling," she said, air kissing near my cheek without actually making contact. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Mrs. Pemberton was just asking about your little fashion venture." The way she said little fashion venture made it sound like a lemonade stand I was operating from our garage. Mrs. Pemberton, the wife of the city's most successful real estate developer, turned toward me with polite interest. She was wearing what I recognized as this season's Valentino, probably $15,000 worth of couture that she'd purchased during her last shopping trip to Paris. "How exciting, dear," Mrs. Pemberton said with the kind of enthusiasm one might show for a child's attempt at finger painting. "Veronica tells me you're trying your hand at fashion design. Such a creative field." Before I could respond, Mom launched into her carefully rehearsed explanation. "Isabella's been exploring her artistic side. You know how important it is for young women to have creative outlets. She's been working on some clothing designs, learning about fabrics and patterns. Very hands-on experience." The way she described it made me sound like someone taking a community college course as a hobby, rather than someone who'd been building a business for the past 6 years. "How wonderful," Mrs. Pemberton nodded approvingly. "And are you selling your designs locally? Perhaps at some of the boutiques downtown?" "I work with several retail locations," I replied carefully. "Oh, like those little shops on Elm Street?" Mrs. Pemberton's tone suggested she was trying to be encouraging about what was obviously a modest beginning to a potentially promising hobby. "Among others," I said neutrally. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd coached me extensively on how to discuss my work at events like this, emphasize the learning experience, downplay any actual business success, and never mention specific numbers or achievements that might make people uncomfortable. According to Mom, the last thing anyone wanted to hear at an elegant social gathering was detailed information about retail operations or profit margins. Better to keep things vague and focus on the creative fulfillment aspects of exploring fashion as an artistic outlet. "Well," Mrs. Pemberton said with finality, "I'm sure you're learning valuable lessons about creativity and self-expression. Those skills will serve you well in whatever career you eventually choose." The implication was clear. What I was doing now was practice for the real work I'd hopefully transition to someday. Mom nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased with how the conversation was going. "That's exactly what we've told her," Mom agreed. "Isabella's always been very artistic. Not everyone has the practical skills for serious business ventures like your husband's developments, Patricia. Sometimes our children need time to explore their creative side before finding their true calling." I excused myself and made my way toward the bar, needing something to steady my nerves after being discussed like an indulgent teenager who was being allowed to play with fashion before accepting adult responsibilities. The bartender, a professional I recognized from other upscale events, smiled as he prepared my drink. "Tough crowd tonight?" "Family events usually are," I replied, accepting the glass of wine gratefully. "I've worked a lot of these society parties," he said, polishing glasses with practiced efficiency. Amazing how people can spend 5 minutes talking to someone and think they understand their entire life story. Before I could respond, I spotted my stepfather working his way through the crowd toward me. Richard Sterling commanded attention wherever he went. At 6'3" with distinguished gray hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd built a financial empire from nothing, he was exactly what central casting would order for a wealthy investment banker. Isabella. Richard's voice carried the hearty warmth he used for client meetings and political fundraisers. There's my stepdaughter. How are you enjoying the party? It's beautiful, I replied honestly. Mom outdid herself with the planning. She certainly did. 20 years of marriage deserves a proper celebration. He gestured around the opulent ballroom. Your mother has exquisite taste, always has. Speaking of which, she mentioned you're working in fashion now. Following in her footsteps, you might say. Richard had always been kind to me, even when Mom's disappointment in my life choices was obvious. He'd married into our family when I was 16, bringing stability and unlimited financial resources that had transformed our lives completely. I wouldn't say I'm following in her footsteps exactly, I said carefully. Well, you're both interested in beautiful clothes and elegant design. That's something you have in common. He lowered his voice slightly. Between you and me, your mother is worried that you're not being practical enough about your career prospects. She wants to see you succeed, but she also wants you to be realistic about the fashion industry. I'd heard this concern before. The gentle suggestion that I needed to temper my artistic ambitions with practical considerations like steady income and professional security. I understand her concerns, I said. She loves you, Isabella. We both do. But sometimes love means encouraging someone to make smart choices rather than just following their dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my business partner. Luxe Boutique grand opening was incredible. Lines around the block, sold out of half our inventory. The Vogue editor wants to feature us in next month's issue. Congratulations, boss. I quickly silenced my phone and slipped it back into my purse, but not before Richard noticed the interruption. Work emergency? He asked with gentle amusement. Just some business updates. Ah, well, it's good that you're taking your fashion work seriously, even if it's still in the early stages. Shows dedication and professionalism. Before I could respond, Mom's voice rang out across the ballroom, calling for everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced from the small stage where a string quartet had been playing, Richard and I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone with us. 20 years of marriage feels like both a lifetime and just the beginning. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. We've been blessed with love, success, and the most wonderful friends anyone could ask for, she continued, her voice carrying perfectly across the space. But most importantly, we've been blessed with family. She gestured toward where Richard and I stood near the edge of the gathering. Our daughter Isabella represents the next generation of Sterling women, and while she's still finding her path in life, we're proud of her creativity and her determination to pursue her passions. More applause, warm but patronizing. I could see people nodding approvingly at this description of the young Sterling daughter who was being supported while she explored her artistic interests. Speaking of family, Mom continued, we'd love to capture some formal portraits tonight. The photographer has set up a beautiful backdrop, and we want to document this special evening with the people who matter most to us. She stepped down from the stage and made her way through the crowd toward where Richard and I stood. Behind her, I could see the photographer adjusting his equipment, preparing for what would undoubtedly be an elaborate photo session. Isabella, darling, Mom said as she approached, we'll start with some family portraits, then do some group shots with our closest friends. She looked me up and down critically, taking in my simple black dress, my department store shoes, my minimal jewelry. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, from social hostess mode to the kind of focused assessment she usually reserved for planning charity gala logistics. Actually, she said quietly, perhaps we should do the family photos later. After you've had a chance to freshen up a bit. I felt heat creep up my neck. Is something wrong with how I look? Of course not, sweetheart. You look lovely. It's just. She gestured helplessly at my outfit. These photos are going to be displayed at the country club, featured in the society pages, included in our holiday cards. They need to represent our family properly. Richard was looking uncomfortable now, clearly sensing the tension in this conversation. Veronica, he said gently, Isabella looks beautiful. She does look beautiful, Mom agreed quickly. It's not about her appearance. It's about the presentation. The image we're projecting as a family. I stared at her, trying to process what she was actually saying. You don't want me in the family photos. I want you in the photos, she said firmly. I just want you to look like you belong in them. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel. Mom wasn't trying to be hurtful. But because they revealed exactly how she saw me. As someone who didn't naturally belong in the elegant world she'd worked so hard to build. What would I need to change? I asked quietly. Mom glanced around nervously, clearly aware that this conversation was happening in full view of her anniversary party guests. Well, perhaps something with a bit more presence? More sophisticated? I have some beautiful dresses upstairs that might work better. She meant dresses that cost thousands of dollars. Dresses that would make me look like I belonged among the designer-clad women filling her ballroom. Or, she added hopefully, we could schedule a separate photo session next week, when you've had time to shop for something more appropriate. The suggestion hung in the air like an accusation. I wasn't dressed appropriately for my own family's anniversary photos. You can't be in the family photos looking like that, she said in a harsh whisper, glancing around to make sure none of her guests were overhearing this conversation. I stood there for a moment, processing the full impact of what had just happened. My own mother had just banned me from family photos at her anniversary party because my clothes weren't expensive enough to meet her standards. I understand, I said calmly, stepping away from where the photographer was setting up his equipment. I moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom and pulled out my phone to check the messages I'd been ignoring all evening. There were dozens, congratulations from my team, updates from store managers, interview requests from fashion magazines, and meeting invitations from investors who wanted to discuss our expansion plans. But it was the message from Sarah Chin, the editor-in-chief of Vogue, that caught my attention. Isabella, the luxe boutique opening was extraordinary. We want to feature your story in next month's issue. The young designer who's revolutionizing luxury retail. Can we schedule a photo shoot at your flagship store? I was still reading when I heard a commotion near the photo area. Mom's best friend, Caroline Martinez, was staring at something on her phone with obvious excitement. Veronica. Caroline called out, her voice cutting through the ambient party chatter. You have to see this. The most amazing thing just happened downtown. Mom paused her conversation with the photographer and turned toward Caroline with polite interest. What is it, dear? That new boutique, Luxe Boutique, had its grand opening today. The one I've been dying to visit? Caroline held up her phone, showing what appeared to be a news article. Look at these photos. The owner is so young and elegant, and apparently she's revolutionizing high-end fashion retail. Several women gathered around Caroline's phone, all murmuring with interest about this new boutique that was apparently causing quite a stir in fashion circles. I've been trying to get an appointment there for weeks, added Mrs. Davidson, the hospital foundation president. They're completely booked. Apparently, their designer has created the most incredible collection, things you literally can't find anywhere else. The owner is supposed to be some kind of prodigy, Caroline continued, scrolling through the article. Started with nothing and built this incredible fashion empire. The article says she's only 30 and she's already being compared to major designers. Mom was trying to look interested while clearly being impatient to get back to her photo session, but I could see several of her friends becoming increasingly excited about this boutique discussion. Show me the picture, demanded Elizabeth Chin, the wife of our city's most successful attorney. I want to see what this fashion prodigy looks like. Caroline turned her phone so the group could see the screen more clearly. Here she is, Isabella Laurent. Isn't she gorgeous? And so sophisticated looking. I watched Mom's face as she looked at the photo on Caroline's phone. I saw the exact moment when recognition hit her, the instant when her brain processed what she was seeing. The elegant young woman in the Vogue-worthy photo was me. That's... Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Caroline, that's... Isn't she stunning? Caroline continued enthusiastically. The article says she owns the entire building, not just the boutique. Apparently, she bought the property last year and completely renovated it. The retail space is just the ground floor. She has design studios and offices upstairs, plus a penthouse apartment. The entire building? Mrs. Pemberton looked impressed. Do you know how much real estate costs in that area? We're talking about millions of dollars. Elizabeth Chen was reading another article on her own phone. It says here that her boutique collection sold out in 4 hours. 4 hours. And these aren't inexpensive pieces. Dresses starting at $3,000, evening gowns up to $15,000. $15,000 dresses? Mrs. Davidson gasped. And people are buying them? Apparently there's a waiting list, Caroline replied, still scrolling through articles. Fashion Week buyers are flying in from New York and Paris just to see her work. Mom was still staring at Caroline's phone like it contained impossible information. The article mentions that she's been building her fashion empire for 6 years, Elizabeth continued reading. Started designing in college, built a following through social media and pop-up shows, then quietly opened several successful boutiques before launching this flagship store. Several boutiques? Mrs. Pemberton looked confused. I thought this was her first store. No, apparently she owns boutiques in 4 different cities. This is just her largest location, her flagship store in her hometown. I could see Mom's face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic as she processed this information. Wait, she said slowly, did you say the owner's name was Isabella Laurent? Yes, isn't that a beautiful name? Very sophisticated, very fashion-forward. Mom turned toward where I'd been standing, but I'd moved closer during their conversation. Now I was directly behind the group, close enough to see Caroline's phone screen clearly. Actually, I said calmly, Laurent is my professional name. I use it for business purposes. The entire group turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. Your professional name? Caroline repeated slowly. I'm Isabella Laurent, I said simply. I own Luxe Boutique. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the string quartet playing on the other side of the ballroom. Mom's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound seeming to break the spell that had fallen over the group. You own Luxe Boutique? Mrs. Davidson's voice was barely a whisper. Among other things, I replied, pulling a folder from my purse. I'd been carrying it all evening, planning to show it to Mom privately after the party. But circumstances had changed. I handed her the property deed, the business licenses, and the latest financial statements for Laurent Fashion Group, my company that owned and operated luxury boutiques in 4 cities. This is impossible, Mom said, her hands shaking as she looked through the documents. Isabella, you can't possibly own. These numbers can't be right. Which numbers specifically? Annual revenue of $47 million, she read aloud. Property holdings valued at $12 million. Staff of 83 employees across 4 locations. Each number seemed to hit the group like a physical blow. Caroline was staring at me like I'd just announced I was secretly royalty. You're the Isabella Laurent that Vogue wants to feature? That's correct. The designer that Fashion Week buyers are flying in to see? Yes. The woman who sold $15,000 dresses in 4 hours? I nodded. Elizabeth Chen was frantically Googling on her own phone now. There are articles about you in Harper's Bazaar, Elle Women's Wear Daily. Isabella, you're being called one of the most innovative fashion entrepreneurs under 35. That's very flattering. Mrs. Pemberton was looking at the financial documents Mom was still holding. $12 million in property holdings? You own the buildings your boutiques are in? I own all 4 buildings, yes. I learned early that real estate appreciation is often more valuable than retail profits in the long term. Mom finally found her voice. Isabella, how long? How long have you been building this business? 6 years. Since I was 24. But you told us you were exploring fashion design, learning about fabrics and patterns. I was also applying what I learned to build a luxury retail empire. The group was starting to attract attention from other party guests, who were drawn by the obvious drama of this conversation. Richard appeared at Mom's elbow, clearly sensing that something significant was happening. What's going on? Mom handed him the documents with trembling hands. Isabella owns Luxe Boutique. The boutique Caroline's been trying to get an appointment at for weeks. Isabella owns it. Richard looked through the papers, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement. Isabella, this says your company is worth. This can't be right. The valuation is conservative, I said. We had it appraised for insurance purposes last month. The actual market value is probably closer to $60 million. The number seemed to ripple through the growing crowd of onlookers like a shock wave. $60 million? Mom's voice was hollow. That's if I wanted to sell, which I don't. I'm planning to expand to 2 more cities next year. Caroline was still scrolling through articles about me on her phone. Veronica, your daughter is famous in fashion circles. There are interviews with her in major magazines, features about her innovative retail concepts, discussions of her influence on luxury fashion trends. I don't understand, Mom said weakly. If you were building this incredible business, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were just playing around with design as a hobby? I looked around at the faces surrounding me, women who had spent the evening treating me like an indulgent young person who needed encouragement to pursue more practical career goals. Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I was unsuccessful. The words landed like a challenge. We've always supported your creativity, Mrs. Pemberton protested. We've always encouraged your artistic pursuits. Have you? Because an hour ago, you were asking if I was selling my designs at those little shops on Elm Street. You were treating my work like a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. We didn't know, Mrs. Davidson said defensively. You never told us what you were really accomplishing. I told you I was working with retail locations. I told you I was building a fashion business. I told you the work required all my time and attention. What I didn't tell you was exactly how successful I was being, because I wanted to see if you could respect my work regardless of the financial results. Mom was crying now, her perfect makeup starting to streak. Isabella, I'm so sorry. We had no idea that you were building something so extraordinary. But you did know I was working hard and following my passion. You just couldn't respect that work until you found out it was profitable. The accuracy of this observation was written across every face in the growing crowd. And Mom, I continued, looking directly at her, 20 minutes ago you banned me from family photos because my clothes weren't expensive enough. You said I couldn't be in the pictures looking like this. She flinched like I'd slapped her. The irony is that while you were embarrassed by my appearance, I was actually dressed more appropriately than anyone else here. What do you mean? Richard asked. I mean that everything I'm wearing tonight was designed by me. This dress, these shoes, this jewelry, they're all from my collections. You were embarrassed by clothes that will probably be featured in next month's Vogue. The revelation seemed to stun everyone into silence. Caroline looked at my dress with new eyes. You designed what you're wearing? Everything except the handbag. It's gorgeous, Elizabeth breathed. The cut, the fabric, the way it fits. I thought it was something simple, but now that I really look at it. Simplicity is harder to achieve than complexity, I said. This dress took me 3 months to perfect. Mom was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You've been wearing your own designs all along. For the past 4 years, yes. Why would I wear other people's clothes when I can create exactly what I want? Mrs. Pemberton was still looking at the financial documents. Isabella, if these numbers are accurate, you're one of the most successful young women in this city. I'm probably one of the most successful women under 40 period. Richard was reading through the business licenses with obvious amazement. You employ 83 people? 86 as of this week. We're expanding. And your boutiques are in 4 cities? Chicago, Miami, Dallas, and here. Next year we're opening in Los Angeles and New York. Each detail seemed to make the scope of my success more real and more impressive. Isabella, Mom said quietly, I owe you an enormous apology. We owe you an apology. For what specifically? For not seeing what you were building. For treating you like you were playing at being a designer when you were actually becoming one of the most successful fashion entrepreneurs in the region. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Mom, you didn't just fail to see my success. You were actively embarrassed by what you thought was my failure. You banned me from family photos because you thought my clothes weren't good enough for your image. I was wrong, she whispered. I was so completely wrong. You were wrong about my clothes, but you were also wrong about what success looks like. You assumed that because I wasn't displaying wealth in obvious ways, I wasn't building wealth at all. I gestured around the ballroom at the designer gowns and expensive jewelry that had impressed everyone so much. Every woman in this room is wearing clothes that cost thousands of dollars, but they're wearing other people's designs, other people's creativity, other people's vision. I'm wearing something I created myself. Something that represents my own artistic vision and business acumen. The distinction was starting to sink in. When you look at Mrs. Pemberton's Valentino gown, you're seeing Valentino's success. When you look at my dress, you're seeing mine. Mom was nodding now, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Isabella, I understand, and I'm so ashamed of how I've treated you. I don't want you to be ashamed. I want you to be proud of me for the right reasons. Not because I make a lot of money, but because I built something meaningful. Not because I wear expensive clothes, but because I create them. Richard stepped forward and put his arm around my shoulders. We are proud of you, Isabella. Incredibly, amazingly proud. What you've accomplished is extraordinary. And I want to support you properly, Mom added desperately. Not by offering advice you don't need or guidance you've already surpassed, but by being a mother who understands and appreciates what her daughter has built. I looked at these people who had spent the evening treating me like an indulgent young woman who needed patience while she explored her creative side, not realizing they were talking to one of the most successful fashion entrepreneurs in the region. The photographer is still here, I said finally. If you want to take family photos, I'm ready. Mom's face lit up with hope. You'll stay for the photos? On one condition. Anything. You introduce me accurately. Not as someone who's exploring fashion design, but as someone who's mastered it. Not as someone who's finding her path, but as someone who's built her own road. Of course, she said eagerly. Isabella Lauron, founder and CEO of Lauron Fashion Group, owner of luxury boutiques in 4 cities, designer of everything beautiful. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The photo session that followed was unlike any family portrait we'd ever taken. Instead of trying to blend into Mom's elegant world, I stood confidently as someone who had created her own version of elegance. Instead of being positioned as the daughter who needed support, I was clearly the daughter who had achieved something extraordinary. 3 months later, I was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. The article was titled, The Stealth Success: How Isabella Lauron Built a Fashion Empire While Her Family Thought She Was Playing Dress-Up. It told the story of Lauron Fashion Group, of the innovative retail concepts that had made me one of the youngest successful fashion entrepreneurs in the country, of the business philosophy that had turned creative passion into a multimillion-dollar enterprise. But it also told the story of my family, of the assumptions they'd made and how those assumptions had been shattered at an anniversary party that changed everything. It discussed the danger of equating visible wealth with actual success, the importance of looking beyond appearances to see what people are really building. The article included a photo of my family at the grand opening of our New York boutique. Mom, Richard, and I standing together in front of the Lauron Fashion Group logo. All of us dressed in my designs, all smiling genuinely. The caption read, The Sterling Family Today, Learning to See Success in New Ways. It wasn't perfect. Relationships that had been built on false assumptions don't heal overnight. But it was honest, and it was real, and it was based on truth instead of appearances. And for the first time since I'd started Lauron Fashion Group, I felt like I could share my success with the people who mattered most instead of hiding it from their judgment. The daughter they'd thought was playing dress-up had been dressing up an entire industry. And now, finally, they could see the difference.